way into the OED. So first we have, I'm just going to show you some of the parts of a typical OED entry. So of course we have the head word, can't have a dictionary without head words, right? And then we also indicate the part of speech. And then we also, so far so typical, all dictionaries have that. And then we also have the pronunciation in the International Phonetic Alphabet in both British and American English. We have also recently added audio pronunciations in the December 2015 update. So if you click on these blue buttons, you can actually hear the head word pronounced in British and American English. And then in this section are listed the different forms and spellings of the word throughout its history and the centuries in which they were used. So you can see that abaca has been spelled with one C, with two C's, with a K. So those are the different forms that the word had. And then in this section is another new feature of the dictionary, which is frequency marking. These blue dots are an interactive graphic indicating the relative frequency of the head word in modern English. So by that we mean from 1970 to the present day. So if you position your mouse over this graphic, this will display the frequency band, and if you click on that, the graphic produces a pop-up with further information. And in due course, we also plan to present a historical picture illustrating a word's changing frequency over time. So far we only have the frequency for modern English, but someday we hope to have also the historical frequencies. And the next is the etymology section. So the OED's etymologies are rich and intricately detailed, but the default view for etymologies is a short introductory summary, which states a word's origin in generic terms as a prelude to the full etymology. So first of all, like, hold on, I thought it was Southeast Asian, why does it say it's a borrowing from French? That doesn't make sense. But if you click through to the rest of the etymology, it tells us that that the word can ultimately be traced back to the
light off, so we can.
Let me, I think we can get just this front line.
Okay. So you can see that the word can be ultimately traced back to the Philippine language Tagalog, and then from Tagalog it's made its way into Spanish, then from Spanish into French, and finally from French into English. And then finally we have the definitions. Also hard to have a dictionary without definitions. So it can be simple and straightforward like this one, or it can be long and branching out into many senses, subsenses, compounds, and phrases. I think the longest entry we have at the moment is the verb run, which took an editor like 6 months to revise. Okay. And then a feature that sets the OED apart from the dictionaries that came before it is that it is based on the evidence of actual usage. So the 600,000 words in the dictionary are illustrated by over 3 million quotations taken from a wide variety of sources, from classic literature to newspapers, magazines, and cookery books. Most of this massive amount of evidence were contributions from an enthusiastic public and volunteer readers who set to Oxford masses and masses of quotation slips with interesting examples of how words are used. These quotations are in this section of the entry, the one that you can see there, highlighted in blue. And in this example, we can see that the earliest known use of abaca in English is in a book published in 1751, so it is quite an old word. And then we have further authentic examples for every succeeding century until the 21st. So we can see that although it is an old word, it's still quite a current word, so because we still have evidence until 2001. So another example is one of our newest entries from the March 2016 update, tarik. So it has a regional label, so we've labeled it Malaysian English and Singapore English. And you also notice that in the phonetic transcription, apart from the UK and US pronunciations, there's also the Singaporean and Malaysian pronunciation. So soon, all regional entries will have audio pronunciations as well, recorded in the actual representative accent of the region in which the word originates. So soon that we will see regional pronunciations, audio pronunciations in the OED as well. So most of the people think of the OED as a quintessentially British product, and it certainly started out as one when it was first conceived in the 19th century.
Danica, forgive me. Can I turn the lights back on?
Yeah.
Now that we're out of the detail bit?
Yeah. Easy for me. Yeah, but now, in the next few slides, we're going on a brief journey through the history of the OED and discover that Southeast Asia has in fact been part of the dictionary from the very beginning, from its very first published installment through to its many varying incarnations up to its current state as an online dictionary. So the dictionary began as an ambitious project proposed by the Philological Society in London in 1857. This guy called Richard Chevenix Trench read a paper to the society pointing out the deficiencies of existing English dictionaries and calling for a new dictionary based on historical principles. Things did not really get into high gear for this ambitious project until 1879, when Oxford University Press undertook to finance and publish a dictionary and appointed this guy, James Murray, as its chief editor, a position he held until he died in 1915, sadly while working on the letter T, just a few letters shy of completion. So creating this ideal dictionary was more work than James Murray and his team thought, and after 5 years of toil, they were finally able to publish the first installment of the dictionary, which covered A to Ant. Now, this installment and the succeeding ones that made up the first edition of the dictionary was written under the assumption that standard British English made up the common core of the language. But this is not to say, however, that OED 1 was entirely inhospitable to words of non-British origin. You know, the many thousands of World English words that entered the dictionary during Murray's editorship are evidence of his commitment to including this type of vocabulary in the OED. And we can see that with abaca, Southeast Asia has been represented in the OED from its very first installment of 1884. These other words from Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand are examples of words that were included in later installments of the first edition. So these words might be familiar to you as well. So we have kampong from Malaysia, tarik from Indonesia, wat from what's that from? Thailand, and kiat from Myanmar. And then of course all of these and many other words of Southeast Asian origin, such as those shown in this word cloud, made it into the first edition of the OED, which was published as a 10-volume set in 1928. Okay, and then a few years later, a supplementary volume was published in 1933, and this also had within its pages some words from the Philippines, some from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and from Myanmar. Then, the OED's coverage of Southeast Asia was further expanded in the 1970s and 80s with the publication of the 4-volume supplement edited by Robert Birchfield. Now, work on this supplement began at a time when Englishes spoken in different parts of the world began to be recognized as varieties in their own right. And the OED addressed this phenomenon by adding an even wider range of words to these varieties, including those of Southeast Asia, as you can see the examples on this slide. So we have a wider range of countries being represented and a wider range of borrowings from a larger number of different languages. Then the year 1989 saw the publication of the 20-volume second edition of OED, which is a combination of OED 1 and the supplements, along with thousands of previously unpublished words, including these 4 words here that come from the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Alright, so now the OED has always kept pace not only with the language but also with modern technology. It made history in 1992 when a CD-ROM edition of the work was published. Remember when CD-ROMs were the thing, were the picture? So we were in on that in 1992. And then again in 2000 when OED.com was launched, making the dictionary one of the first major reference works of its kind to have an online presence. And so today, the OED is undergoing a complete overhaul for its 3rd edition, which is available exclusively online. The current revision of the OED is a huge lexicographical undertaking as ambitious as the creation of the dictionary itself, as it involves updating text from the original volumes that has remained unchanged for several decades, in order to incorporate new information that recent linguistic research and modern technological innovations have made available to lexicographers. Now, improving and widening its coverage of World Englishes continue to be one of the top priorities of the ongoing revision project, and on this slide are just some examples of words from Southeast Asia that we have been adding to the third edition since the year 2000. So you might be familiar with some of them. So Balikbayan Box, Dinayan, Kiasu from Singapore, Nabi Bani, Pad Thais, you've all tasted that. Lebak from Malaysia, and then from, which is a type of popular music in Indonesia, I believe. Oops, what happened there? Okay. So one of the biggest advantages of the digitization of the OED is that it has freed all the words within it from the shackles of the alphabetical order. Whereas before, the only way to access OED content was to leaf through pages looking for a specific word in its alphabetical place in one of 10 or 20 very heavy books. Now, there are various ways in which its users can engage with the OED. Advances in computational lexicography have shifted the focus of interest from single word lookups to more general investigations of linguistic trends. And this one last thing I would like to highlight in this talk. We have created this visual timeline of Southeast Asian words in the OED, now freely available on the OED's public pages, so you can come over to our stand later if you want to know the URL for this timeline. And so this timeline allows us to explore over 300 definitions and quotations from the OED for words and meanings from Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam, from 1555 to the present day. So that's how wide is the coverage of the OED is of this particular region. So looking at the OED in this dynamic new way highlights how the dictionary is more than just an inventory of words. It's also a chronicle of sorts, a mirror of social history. And if we look at the Southeast Asian words that made it into the OED in the 16th, so if you zoom in the visual timeline and look at some examples of words that made it into the OED in the 16th and 17th centuries, you'll notice that they're mostly referring to like native flora and fauna, languages, ethnic groups. So this gives us an idea that this period, the 1500s and the 1600s, was a period of discovery and settlement from the European perspective at least. And European colonizers were just getting to grips with this brave new world that they found, and they're borrowing words from other languages in the region to describe their new discoveries. So it's little wonder that the evidence for Southeast Asian English words of this period came from early specialist dictionaries and navigational and geographical accounts in English or translated into English from other colonial languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Dutch. Now, if we move on, so this is the 17th century as well, but if you move on to the 1700s and on to the 1800s, we see more Southeast Asian words belonging to the spheres of business, literature, music, art, mythology, and cookery, as the colonies and the whole trade surrounding it became much more established, and you find Southeast Asians and their European colonizers trying to coexist together. So that is somehow reflected in the type of words that came into the dictionary at this time. And then, in the 20th century, as Southeast Asian countries become independent nations, we see an influx of a new type of local vocabulary. We see more creative innovations, words that relate to everyday Southeast Asian life, a colorful new local slang, and also we see Southeast Asians begin to have fun with English, to take it as their own language and also to experiment with it and make it more not about Europeans talking about them and their world, but themselves, talking about themselves and the objects that form part of it, the objects, the places, the plants and animals that form part of their lives. And they also become more, as I said, more playful, more creative, and they use a wide range of strategies in the creation of new words. So they, not just borrowing from their other languages, but also adding affixes, abbreviating words, putting them together, blending them, shortening them, lengthening them, changing words from one part of speech to another, and then translating directly from their language to English, blending. So for instance, we saw in Balikbayan box, we have a Tagalog word being combined with an English word, and then, or just completely changing the meaning of a word. You know, if blur means unclear, but to Singaporeans it means someone who's a bit clumsy, or if in the rest of the English-speaking word, to salvage something is to rescue it, well, for Filipinos is to execute someone. So I think this is also very interesting, and we can see that in the kind of words that's being added to the OED that are much more current. So I think the OED was just in the news in the Philippines yesterday, because we added this word, kilig, which I know all the Filipinos in the audience are like, oh, because it's a very hard word to translate. So it's the butterflies that you feel in your stomach when you see someone you like, or you experience something romantic. And so I love it. It's my favorite. I try not to play favorites with the words that I work on, but I must say this one is my favorite because it just goes to show, like, all these mechanisms of lexical innovation that I've been talking about is distilled in this one word, because it's a borrowing from Tagalog. It's reflecting something of our culture that we find important to have a word for. And then it's just become, it's a noun, it's also an adjective, and it's just become very productive. So we use it in new phrases like kilig moment, kilig factor, kilig to the bones. So I found that just a very, very interesting to work on. And it's been received very positively in the Philippines. And this takes me now to my conclusion, wherein I will talk about very briefly, like, what are we doing now to establish the future of Southeast Asian Englishes and other world Englishes in the OED. So we're adding new labels. So all these labels that I showed you, Singapore English, Malaysian English, and Philippine English, those are new additions to the dictionary. And we're also publishing new items regularly in a recent and upcoming updates, so we just published several Southeast Asian English words in the last 3 or 4 updates of OED. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to add Southeast Asian pronunciations based on the relevant phonological model, including recordings of regional pronunciations. So I did the recordings for Philippine English. So I apologize to my fellow Filipinos. I am the voice of the Philippines. I assure you that we had this big, like, reality show going on, and I won. So sorry, you're stuck with my voice. And then we had a Singaporean come in to do the recordings for Singapore English. So I think, so we're doing it not just for Southeast Asian Englishes, but all regional varieties of English. So that's Scottish people doing Scottish recordings, and all that's going to be in the dictionary in the next few months. And then we're going to implement changes to our inclusion criteria for new words to make sure that we accommodate words from Southeast Asian Englishes. Because understandably, since most of these words are only used in one part of the English-speaking word, when it comes to frequency, they cannot compete with huge words like selfie or twerk or things like that, which are used by everyone in the English-speaking world. So as far as frequency goes, they kind of tend to go under the radar, so we're making sure that our inclusion criteria are flexible enough to make sure that we pay attention to these less used but not less important regional words. And then we are keen to collaborate with local vocabulary experts to help us in our research, and also to add to existing research databases and language corporates to include more and better resources for Southeast Asian Englishes. And we're also experimenting with various crowdsourcing methods for gathering lexical data. So we can do that online with OED appeals, which we've had for quite a number of years now. And also at events like this, where we try to have some presence so that we can meet people who speak these regional varieties and ask them, what words would you like to suggest? So the OED is very open. I mean, it's not like, we're the guardians of the language, we're the ones who decide which goes in, but we kind of do, but it's just that words go in there because people use them, and it's only helpful for the people who speak these varieties to actually tell us what they want us to look at and to see if they can be included in the dictionary. And then finally, So I'd like to end by asking and answering two important questions. So first, why is it important to record the Southeast Asian English lexicon in a dictionary? So why? Well, it is important to do this because, as the recognized authority that sets notions of propriety and correctness, the dictionary, especially one as respected as the OED, plays a central role in the codification and institutionalization of a language, or a language variety. So it has this unique ability to confer legitimacy to words and give confidence to the people who use them. And it's weird, the power that this kind of power the dictionaries have. So documenting words from Southeast Asian varieties of English in a dictionary serves as a strong argument for the recognition of their own separate norms, which can be considered equal to those of standard British and American English. We don't have to sound like Americans to use English properly. We don't have to be British to feel like English is our language. And it also gives speakers of these varieties the assurance that the English they use is legitimate and helps them recognize themselves as members of a distinct language community. And this is in turn can lead to a change in the traditional perception of language change, not as a sign of decay. We're not ruining the language by changing it. This is just an expression of local identity and culture through a global lingua franca. And secondly, why is it important to correct imbalances in the OED's coverage of Southeast Asian Englishes? Because to make valid the OED's claims to being the foremost authority on the history of the English language, it has to be able to show that lexical innovation in emerging varieties of English goes beyond the adoption of exotic loanwords. We don't go about in Southeast Asia talking about animals and plants all the time. Southeast Asian users of English have contributed more to the English lexicon than just plant and animal terms. Their words have been, as I hope I have shown here, our words have been an integral part of English for centuries, and representing them properly in the OED is a way of recognizing their significance in the history of English. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Judy Pearsall, I think you have a very different sort of language project for us.
I do actually, and I'm just going to go and change the slides over here. Cool. Let's keep it a little mouse. Hi, so I'm actually going to stand up just because I need to get my breath going. So my name's Judy Pearsall and I'm the Dictionaries Director for Oxford University Press, which means that I'm responsible for all of the dictionary activity that we do, including the OED, which is one of our largest projects, but also including the new project I'm going to talk about today. So Oxford Global Languages is an example of an exciting and important new initiative from OUP. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about that. And before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Oxford University Press, because I just want to sort of explain what kind of an organisation we are if you're not sure. We are a department of the university, and we share the university's mission of disseminating education, research and scholarship worldwide, and we do it through our publishing. And our offices are on Walton Street over there. It looks very much like an Oxford college in lots of ways, but that's where the similarity ends, if you like. So we are very much a global organisation. I think just like Danica was saying about the OED, people might think it's to do with English in Oxford. We publish in more than 40 languages, and we have offices, branches, and other representation in more than 100 countries. And about 80% of the money that we get from our publishing comes from outside the UK. So it really is a global organisation, and that's very important for we're going to be talking about today. And just a few more facts about OUP. It's the largest university press in the world. It's one of the oldest. It's been going for around 500 years. We're non-profit, so we make loads of money. We actually make a lot of money, but we give it back to the university, or we invest it back into the programs that we want to fund. And so we fund initiatives that we want to do for in order to further our mission. We've got about 6,000 people all over the world working on all of our projects, and they'll range from producing materials for 5-year-olds to producing academic monographs and journals, and everything in between. We've got a lot of local schools businesses in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in India, in all over the world, China and so on. So we're very much becoming a more digital business, so more than half of what we do is comes from digital activity. So that's kind of sort of business context I just wanted you to be aware of. I also wanted to just remind ourselves, and Danica's done this very well already, of the kind of connection between what I'm going to be talking about today and what Danica was talking about. So although they're 150 or 160 years apart, they actually have got some similar traditions in terms of what they're trying to do. So we've very much got a tradition of public involvement, of working with people, of working with people who have got the information that we need to produce, in this case, the OED. And we can say, in all truthfulness, that the OED was doing crowdsourcing well before we ever had a term for it, as Danica described. And like the OED, Oxford Global Languages is ambitious, it's unprecedented in terms of the kinds of lexicography that it's doing, and it's very much, rather than being about English, it's about languages overall. So I'm going to take you through a sort of quick kind of whistle-stop tour of what it is, how we got to doing what we're doing, and what the kind of future looks like, how we're going about that. It's an ambitious program to bring 100 languages online over the next 10 years or so, and make that dictionary and that language information accessible, available worldwide, and with a special focus on languages that are what we call digitally underrepresented, but in a way, I mean, I've heard lots of terms for the same thing. So in other words, the languages that don't have the digital presence, the digital exposure that I take for granted for English, or Spanish speakers might take for granted for Spanish, Chinese and so on, but languages that have many millions of speakers but haven't got the digital presence, and obviously a lot of languages in Southeast Asia would fall into that category. So I'm going to take you through what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we plan for the future. And so this was the challenge, and it's the challenge that we all have faced, which is that the world's becoming more global, the internet's growing exponentially, language is at the heart of our ability to communicate. And yet, there are thousands of languages globally, but the internet's dominated by just a few. And the rest of the languages and their speakers are disadvantaged in cultural, economic, social terms because of not having the digital presence. And by that, I don't just mean that we're not having dictionaries online. I mean not being able to have language information on your phone, or when you're searching, or of the kind that people take for granted if they're speakers of English. So those same resources not being available. There's cultural difficulties because in some parts of the world, languages are, the local languages, the native languages are almost actively discouraged or regarded as somehow inferior to those major languages. There are technical challenges in handling language data digitally. It's complex stuff, and if there are lots of different scripts in languages, that makes it complicated as well. And there are accessibility challenges, so it's not only that you might not be able to get online in lots of parts of the world, but it's expensive, and so it's inaccessible for those reasons. And there are lots and lots of responses to that. I mean, we're certainly not the first to think of this. It's very much, I've seen this topic coming up again and again. There are a lot of scattered initiatives, and there are lots of things going on at a local level. Or there are lots of things happening in a almost top-down sort of government approach. So we're sort of trying to do something that maybe tries to come in between those two. And the sort of further context, and this is that we're very aware of, is that with the growth of the internet, with globalization, there's a demand, there's actually more demand, obviously, for multilingual resources, for resources in many different languages. There's also this phenomenon of democratization of content. So people expect to have more interaction and more say in the content that they see. They expect to be able to like something or contribute to it or discuss it and so on. And that's a sort of growing phenomenon worldwide. Mobile is key. I mean, people are, need to do things on their phones. There's no point it only being available on desktop. And the big global technology companies, by which I mean like Google and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and so on, they know all of this, and they are actively trying to produce products and services in local ways, and that's just one sort of aspect of the context. And we kind of know quite a lot about what those global technology companies are doing, because we've actually been working with them for a number of years, supplying them with the kinds of dictionary content that they are asking for, so that they can build back end for their search engine, so that they can build predictive text, so that they can build spell checkers, so that they can build other products and services. And these are some of the partners. We don't produce all of these dictionaries ourselves, but we work with other publishers of dictionaries to bring the content in and help those technology companies get hold of that in digital form. And these are some of the languages that we've been working on with those big companies. And we are working with big companies, and these are some of the ones that we work with, which will be familiar names to you. And as I say, we work with them by supplying them with content that they can then use to build their goods and services. So that was all fine, but we felt this wasn't enough, and we felt we were, to some extent, we were doing what those big technology companies were doing, who had very commercial goals, and really there was a space in there that was very much more about our mission. And we wanted to help those languages that were maybe in between. They're not endangered languages, but languages that have millions of speakers, and we wanted to help them with the resources, whether it's to look up everyday words or whether it's to help you do whatever activity it is you want to do on your phone, online, on your tablet or whatever. And from our experience of looking around at publishers and sharing, asking them to share content with us, we knew there was a lack of content. It wasn't the case that we could go to a language and say, what's the best dictionary in your language? In lots of cases, there wasn't very much available, there isn't very much available, or it's not digital, it's in print, or it's old, it's out of date, or it's not actually inclusive, because it's not about the language necessarily that people actually use, it's more prescriptive. And so we knew that this was going to be about creating content, developing content, and we knew that to make that real, we needed to have the communities involved themselves. There was no point, as I say, having a top-down approach. It was about the sharing of the two, the expertise and the tools and the knowledge we had about lexicography with the people who know the language itself. And lastly, so that was about making it social and allowing people to communicate and share their thoughts about language, contribute, add to the language in whatever way the community felt was needed. And lastly, we also knew that this was about not creating content just for one purpose, but for creating it for lots of purposes. So if it wasn't going to be reusable, if we could only ever exist over there, then as soon as the world moved on technologically, we would have lost the opportunity to reuse it. And so that's the vision of the programme, which started roughly a year and a half ago. So developing localised websites or whatever digital medium we need for 100 languages and more. Engaging language communities, both to engage and to discuss and so on, but also to contribute content. To focus on those digitally underrepresented languages, and lastly to make sure that what we were creating would serve multiple needs, that it wasn't just something we've created for the moment and then it becomes less useful as the world moves on. And it's worth just pausing on what it's not. So it's not a schools programme. We're not producing educational materials for schools. That doesn't mean schools can't use them. These are freely available resources. But, and it's not specifically a research project. So we're not trying to serve the needs of researchers directly. We're trying to serve the needs of the speakers of the languages. It's not focused on endangered languages in that precise sense of the languages that are literally dying out. These are languages with very many, typically millions of speakers, or at least a million or two speakers. And it's not government sponsored, so we're not doing something that government tells us to do. We're, as I say, acting in a kind of independent space to try and do what we think working with communities is what is needed. That doesn't mean we don't work with all of these groups. It just means that this isn't our own driving force. So, as we were embarking on something very big, and as you saw what Danica said about the ambition of Theory D, and 10 years later they've done A to Ant, we thought, okay, we know this is ambitious, let's spend the first couple of years experimenting, trying things out, really sort of moving fast, getting things out there, not keeping everything back here while we review it. Let's get it out there, let's get people looking at it, let's make sure people can engage, tell us if we're doing the wrong thing, and so on. So this was very much, this first phase of 2 years, we're in the kind of home straight, as it were, of phase one, of building just 10 websites with mobile capability, with 10 communities, with the kind of the back office, the infrastructure behind it built. As I said before, it's really important that we don't just build something and then we can't actually reuse it or do anything more with it. So making sure that the back end was really, really strong and robust, that could scale up to 100 languages and beyond. And making sure that we could make the content available in different ways. So, for example, if you're a developer in Myanmar and you want to be able to use that language, you probably need to access it via an API. So, you need that kind of technological capability as well. So making sure that it's not just consumers looking at websites, but also that developers and licensees could get hold of the content as well. So that was the what we're working on, what we've been working on for phase one. And these were the first 10 languages. And it probably looks like a bit of a random set, but the real impulse was to, being global languages, to look at languages from all over the world and to make sure we were looking at regions which would have different sorts of challenges, that would have different sorts of capability there already, that would have different numbers of speakers. Some of the African languages have got quite small numbers of speakers relative to a language like Indonesian or Kiswahili. And the ones in red are the ones we've launched already, and we've got a stand here, and you can actually go and play around it. You can get the URL and go and look at any of the 4 that have launched already, which is the ones in red. So, how long have we got time?
Take your time. I think about 7 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So how did we do it? What was our approach, and how did we? I said we wanted to make sure we did it for the future and so on. So it's going to give you a little bit more background on that. First thing, so this is the Malay site, launched in March. This is the home page of the Malay site, and you can see 2 versions of it because one's localized in English and one's localized in Malay. And the point here is to show you is we want to move fast. We're aiming. You can see that you might be able to see a little. Might not be that visible, but a little. So we're calling them beta because they're not finished. We're not waiting till we've completed them. We're getting something out there as quickly as we can. You will see. So it's limited what's there at the moment, but it's growing. You can see already there are kind of calls to action. Very strange. Okay. We'll just use it again. That's right. Okay. So this.
Do you mind switching off the lights so we can see better?
Sure. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. Yes, that must be as well. So these invitations, so I said we wanted it to be about communities and about people being able to start contributing. So these are not static sites, these are living dictionaries. These are there for people to contribute to them, or to to go onto Facebook and like I said, sign up for the account. These are free websites, these are free for anyone who goes onto the internet, whether it's on your mobile or on the desktop. So that was the first point about sort of making sure that we get something out there that's usable, that we learn fast, that we see what people are doing, we see what people like, we see what people don't like. We have people managing the sites, and I'll say a little bit quickly about them. So these websites are run by and for the communities. So we have people who are managing the websites, local people who are locally in the regions, who are passionate about what we're trying to do to promote their local language, and these are some of the people we're working with, either as language managers, so those are the people who are actually on the websites, kind of moderating content that's coming in, communicating with people who are part of the community, posting interesting articles or tweeting and so on about things that are of interest in the local language. And then language champions who more broadly promote and advocate. And all of these people are in constant contact with us, telling us, giving us feedback, and telling us what to do next, and we make suggestions as well. So it's a nice collaborative exercise.
Judy, shall I switch the lights back on? Any more detail?
Yeah, I don't think I've got any more details of that level, thanks. So as I said already, kind of being experimental, launching things quickly, focusing on what users want, not on what we think they want, or what academically seems to be the right thing. We are actually focused on what users want. We want to work with others. John, who's sitting at the back there, is our partnership manager. So working with other people, whether it's researchers, whether it's technology companies, whether it's educational organisations who are interested in maybe being part of the initiative in some way. And those are the mobile views of sites. And so there's a whole slide about partnerships, especially for John at the back there. But we know that we don't know everything about how to either on a technical front or on a linguistic front or So working with others, working with some big organisations, working with lots of small organisations is the key for us to deliver what we need. And so just very finally, just a couple of so we've been working, I don't need to say a lot here, we're on track to deliver 10 languages by September this year. And the next couple coming, so Indonesian is one of the languages coming in May. These were the first 2 languages we launched, so these are both African, Southern African languages, North Lesotho and isiZulu, so we launched them in South Africa. And they're doing nicely, got lots of engaged people doing kind of webinars where they add content, all sorts of initiatives going on there, people very, very enthusiastic there. And Malay launched alongside Urdu in March, so that's a kind of very big language and a smaller language, but still a substantial number of people. We're working, so this is early days, that's sort of less than a month old, but we've already got people very excited and starting to add content and engage, and we've started launching forums so that people can discuss things that are of interest to them. I really urge you to go and have a look for yourself. And we won't stop there because we're very hopeful now that we will be able to move ahead to the next phase. And the people that we work with, who give us our funding, as it were, are also very enthusiastic and pleased with what's going on. And so lots more languages, just basically pushing the programme out, getting more digital accessibility into places that might be struggling at the moment, making sure we're developing that content, which, as I said, is key to many regions that don't have the base content in the first place. And those are some of the languages that we've already started to work on for phase 2. Again, you can see a real wide variety of really large languages, but ones that still don't necessarily have the kind of digital capability that I was talking about earlier. And the highlighted ones, Burmese and Tok-Pisin and so on for the Southeast Asian region. But it's global, so we're not. We're focusing our attention in lots of different places. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. For those of you who might not have been here at the beginning, let me apologize again that Gunwan Muhammad is not with us. He's under the weather and appreciates your prayers. It's now sort of our chance to talk through some of these big ideas, and with language we've always got a lot to chew through. Shall I open it up to the floor for any questions on these presentations? Yes, ma'am.
How can I just go? Okay. Yeah, very interesting. I'm just asking, sorry, I forgot.
Judy.
Judy. Do you think the final product can be like the product she was talking about, like with etymologies and also with all the possible entries? And if you can give us an example of an entry, because I just saw a definition of one single word with the definition in English. So I'm interested to see actually how it's really displayed.
So the I don't know if I've got internet access here to show you actual entries. Do we have that? So we can do that.
Yeah, and also if I can also.
But let me answer your questions up. So they're not historical dictionaries. The dictionaries that we're starting with, and as I said, we're starting small, are small. At the moment, most of them are bilingual dictionaries. So they're small bilingual dictionaries. Typically might have 30,000 head words, and so they're simple dictionaries. They don't have etymologies. They don't. I mean, this is where we've started. So we've started with what content can we quickly get hold of, and how can we develop quickly. I think the sort of vision, if you like, would be to provide this, the same kinds of language resources for every language, good for English. We're a long way from that, and so this is the sort of beginning of even just getting some materials available digitally. And as I say, seeing what people are really interested in and are using. So they are very focused on functional use, perhaps more so than academic or research use, which is more the territory of the OED. So,
Okay.
I think Mr. Quick is helping you to pull up some of these live examples. While he's doing that, do we have any more questions from the field? Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Danica. I was just quite curious because when you showed us the example, there was American British pronunciation, and then there's also the local way to pronounce it. I was just wondering whether it's fair, I'm not sure if fair is the right word, whether it's fair to establish American or British pronunciations rather than encouraging the Western tongue to pronounce it in a native way. And
you can go to this is the
I guess I'm kind of like thinking about it in the sense that, like, you know, does this necessarily mean that the OED is for the West in the sense that it's for the Western mind or the Western tongue rather than people living in the West?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. But I think the fact that we have American and British pronunciations for all entries is just a matter of uniformity for the dictionary. Because after all, it's a dictionary, so all of the entries are supposed to be like uniform to a certain degree. That's why we thought that for certain regional varieties, it was very important to add the pronunciation for that particular region, because it would be very strange for a word like balikbayan. So we have the IPA, or we have the recording of it being pronounced the way that an American would say it, which is supposed balikbayan, or then the British would say it. But that would be very strange just to have those two, when in fact the pronunciation is balikbayan. But at the same time, we cannot remove the American and British pronunciations, because after all, British and American continue to be the standard. And so it is important for the OED to preserve those. But I think, just by the very fact that we've added the regional pronunciations, it's a recognition that it's really important to actually have this information as well. And this is not only for other languages, but also other even British varieties like Scottish or even other varieties of American English. So that's.
Sir?
Yeah, I noticed that you have a Malay dictionary. I just want to know, I came late, sorry. I just want to know on what basis do you build the dictionary? Is it a totally new one, or the one based on whatever you have already in the form of Oxford?
So for the first phase, we've very much started out with existing dictionaries. Existing dictionaries that weren't available online, and because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've got a lot of global publishing offices, so we actually have a lot of dictionaries through the whole of our, the whole of our reach. So this is a dictionary that's published by our branch in Malaysia, which is OUP Fajar, and so it's a school's dictionary. It's quite small, it's quite basic, and it's a starting point for where we go next. So in a way, the challenge for us in the next phase, and we've been very conscious of this, and spending a lot of time kind of looking at different experiments that we can perform to kind of prove what might be the best route to go, is that we will, with some of those languages that were on one of the later slides, we will struggle to have any content for some of those languages, or to have anything that's really modern or up-to-date content. So we have to find new ways of creating that content, of developing that content, and we've got a range of proposals that range from kind of creating it from scratch but maybe not in traditional ways, maybe in more kind of interactive ways, to extracting some kind of computational first pass of a dictionary from digital corpora to, you know, in other words, we've got a lot of different, and we're actually carrying out a number of experiments now to sort of work out, okay, and my starting point would be it'll work for some languages in different ways than for others, because it'll depend what is out there already and what kinds of organisations we can work with to sort of maybe help us get to first base.
So is there a reason why you don't work together with the two main bodies in Malaysia and Indonesia who make dictionaries, which make dictionaries? Why don't choosing their material and then proposing it in English? I mean, they are proper dictionary like the English dictionary.
Yeah, so we may well do that. As I say, we started with what, you know, what's available. We started with some simple bilingual dictionaries. We will, if we can work with partners, we will. And we talk to a lot of content owners and publishers all the time. Some of them really want to work with us, and some of them don't. So it's, you know, there are very different, you know, and so it's a growing, it's an evolving. It's not the case that just because there is a good dictionary that it'll instantly be able to come here. We need to work with those people over a period of time if it is the best dictionary. As I say, we've got a programme where we work with third parties, with those content owners to license their content so that we can license it to other partners, and obviously they get remuneration for that. There's you know it's a commercial transaction. So it's about what different ways. We don't have a set way. It has to be done like this, and if we can't get this, we won't do it. We're very much sort of taking a more nuanced approach to, and also depending on what people want. You know, what people regard as a good dictionary for a very high level academic purpose isn't necessarily a good dictionary for ordinary people every day accessing content. So we're also taking looking at it as a consumer. It's a consumer facing idea, if you like. That's starting with ordinary people, ordinary users. Does that help?
Okay, well, I was expecting something more, I mean, so this is an entry. This is one of the entries that you were showing. So this is the entry, coexistence, kehidupan bersama.
It's
So,
translation, yeah.
Yes.
okay, and so what do you look for in the Malay dictionary, kehidupan bersama? I mean, what are you...
So you search, you can search for, just as you would...
It's like Google Translate then. It's exactly like what Google Translate does. It just gives one by one explanation in that particular case. Yeah.
Well, some of them do. Some of them
Okay.
do, and some of them are more detailed. So some of the languages, the dictionaries we have are more detailed.
Yeah.
It's not like Google Translate because it is curated. So in other words, it's been published, it's been reviewed by lexicographers and so on. So it's not like Google Translate in that respect. But yeah, I mean, we're starting from a point where at the moment, I mean, if people want to translate, that's one thing. If people want to engage and develop a language, that's another thing. If people want detailed information about etymology, that's another thing. So to me, it depends on the use case. And we're starting in a place where we are interested in the development of those communities. Google's not interested in whether languages survive or not. I mean, so do you see what I mean? It depends what your goals are, and you know, but starting with somewhere is really what we've tried to do.
I saw a question in the back.
Yeah, thanks. Follow-up question really on pronunciation, which I think is a very interesting topic. I was just thinking, we all know a lot of words in the English language that from the perspective of the donor language are, if you will, mispronounced. You could think of words like thug or shampoo or juggernaut, all these Hindi loads. I'm just wondering if this happens today. There's a word in the media, for example, of a Southeast Asian language, but we also see that most people in the Anglophone media don't pronounce it in a way that is acceptable by native speakers of the donor language. What then is the policy? I'm just wondering, how does that sort of...
You mean the OED policy or for...
Yeah, exactly.
For the OED. Well, first we must remember that the OED is the Oxford English Dictionary. So we're looking at these words as English words. And if, so for a word like juggernaut, whatever it may have been, however it may have been pronounced in the original Hindi, what we are interested in reflecting in the OED is how it's been pronounced by English speakers. But now that Indian English now is also a separate variety, its own separate norms that we're trying to reflect in the dictionary, then if, let's say, an Indian English word comes into English today and we see that there is evidence it's being pronounced in the proper, so to speak, Hindi way in Indian English, then that we will reflect that in the pronunciation section in the entry. But if the word also happens to become part of British English and British people pronounce it the British way, then we will reflect that in the entry as well. And if it happens to be an American usage as well, then we will put the American pronunciation. So just to give an example, when I talk to people about putting Philippine English words into the OED, they always go like, oh, you mean words like boondocks? So it's always boondocks. And like, no, it's not boondocks, because boondocks, I don't think, can be classified as a Philippine English word. It's an American English word, which happens to be from Tagalog. Because are you guys familiar with the word boondocks? It means like
Backwaters, hills,
backwaters,
undeveloped area.
Yeah, a remote area, remote country, and it's usually shortened to the boonies. You know, so it's a very widespread English usage, which the Americans picked up when they were fighting in the Philippines in the Second World War, because bundok in Tagalog means mountains. So it's something that Americans picked up in the Philippines. We don't use it in Philippine English. Americans do. It just happens to come from our language. So we're not going to put the pronunciation bundok in the boondock entry. Rather, we put the American way of pronouncing it, because that's the way it's pronounced. So it really, the policy is, it depends on the word. So we also have to be conscious of the difference between just borrowing and an actual word that's used in the local variety.
I mean, generally speaking, there's a period of assimilation for any language that comes in. So typically when words first come in, into English, they'll tend to be an attempt, because obviously if it's an African language with clicks and you don't have a clicks in your in your phoneme set, then there'll be an attempt to pronounce it in a more local way, and then over time all of those words will assimilate more and more and more, and then it'll be almost like a matter of what we might class as almost pedantry to sort of go back and say, so when people say, well, it's not graffiti, it's graffito, you sort of think, well, are we really still there where we think it's an Italian word?
Or
so
panino.
Yes, yeah. Some people will do that because they know where the language it came from and they feel that's sort of important. But the languages are they're very agnostic. They'll stamp along the way of the things that for how people need to pronounce them. And Danica's point about if the word is used in that particular region, then it makes sense to have a pronunciation.
It might retain the local pronunciation. It might not. So the OED stance is always we go where the evidence tells us. So if there's evidence of one pronunciation, we put that in. If there's not, we won't put it in. That's fine.
Sir, you had something.
I'm absolutely fascinated by both of what you had to say, particularly as I had an uncle who was a dictionary maker here in the 1940s. What he would have made of this world, I don't know. However, what I wanted to say was, you seem to be aware of a political narrative within what you're saying. Lewis Carroll said, the Red Queen says the words have the meanings I give them, neither more nor less. And when you are codifying, as you are here, words, you are actually exercising power. Now, the fact that the OUP is a department of the university, it's not a national institution like the British Broadcasting Corporation, it's not a public corporation, and it's not being funded in order to make profit. Perhaps that puts you in a unique political space where you can do things that are not possible otherwise. However, and this is the point of my question, as you move, and I deeply admire what you're trying to do, what you are doing, towards almost a crowdsourced meaning of words in this way that you're not putting out the etymology, the history of words, but you're actually trying to absorb them as they're being said. I think you said people in Asia want to use English to talk about themselves, not in the way that English wants to talk about them, which I thought was very interesting. Do you feel you will come under pressure from different political groups within different languages to actually dominate with certain meanings of words? I'm sorry for the long question.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and you're right. We're stepping around, what are serious political and cultural issues, and certainly when we haven't got as much experience of the recent launches we've had, but when we launched the African languages, the 2 African languages, we had an awful lot of debate about dialects and what dialects we would allow.
Yes.
And really, and there are myriad distinct dialects in both Northern Sotho and isiZulu, and some of them are almost mutually unintelligible.
Yeah.
And we took the view that, well, we don't have a view that you can or you can't. There's almost not a standard anyway for a lot of these languages. And we didn't feel, but languages as they mature do tend to mature a standard. As they are more codified, they tend to mature a standard, and that's actually a sign of a language gaining confidence and on its own stage, on the world stage, on any other sort of stage. So we're not against standardization. I mean, I think that, as I say, I think that's kind of an inevitable process of how languages develop. But on the other hand, we're not the ones who at this point can impose that, or want to impose that, or need to impose that.
You're holding the ring, almost.
We're trying to, so we've said, okay, it's open, and we almost certainly will need to come back to this. So we know that's, it's the political question that you point out. But we don't actually know exactly what the answer is, except that our purpose, our mission, is that people should be able to use these languages to communicate, to function, to be as economically and socially and culturally active as they can be and want to be. So, that's a bit of a mealy-mouthed answer to your question, but it's...
No, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see how it plays out.
It's very interesting what you say about the politics behind all this, because as I mentioned to Kevin as well when we were discussing this panel, as I'm a lexicographer and I tend to look at words philologically, what they mean, and I work with documents, not people. So sometimes I'm so constantly surprised by the reaction we get when we publish entries. So just to give an example, in 2012, this was before I joined the OED as an editor, we published an entry for Hong Konger. So meaning a native of or a resident of Hong Kong. And it was such big news in Hong Kong. It was all over the papers. It was amazing. And you had politicians talking about it and saying that there was actually a politician who went on the media and saying that, you see, you see the OED added this word, it's a recognition that the world is saying that Hong Kongers are different from Chinese people. So this is a recognition of our identity as separate from China. And you were like, oh no. But if you look into it, I'm sure the lexicographer who made that word, and when the decision is made to add that word, it was a decision to fill an existing lexical gap in the dictionary. We had absolutely no political motivation whatsoever. And the lexicographer who worked on that didn't go, oh, you know what, those Hong Kongers, I think they're different from Chinese. Nobody ever thought in that way. But if you think about it, it's all linked, because the fact that that word came under our radar is because people started talking about Hong Kongers as separate from Chinese. So the evidence that you were looking at suddenly changed, and the word suddenly became more frequent, much more salient to us. And that's why it made it to the dictionary. But as far as a political motivation, we didn't have any. But in a way, since language is always a reflection of, as I said, a reflection of history and of culture, so the word made it into the dictionary because it became part of the political consciousness of the world. And it's really funny that it came to a point that people started making T-shirts in Hong Kong with our definition on the back. And our chief editor, Michael Prophet, is Scottish, and once he was at Edinburgh Airport, the chief editor of the OED, and he saw someone walking around in Edinburgh Airport with with an OED t-shirt, but it's not ours.
You took a photograph.
And he took a photo of it. So I wonder what that guy would have thought if he knew that the editor of the chief editor of the OED was taking a picture of his shirt. But it's, you know, it became like this marketing tool, or like this t-shirt that people in Hong Kong started wearing as a badge of their identity, and they feel pride. And Filipinos, every time we publish a Filipino word in the dictionary, it's a big deal. Newspapers write about it because we feel that it's a recognition of our culture, of our identity, as distinct from American English. So I think as lexicographers, we also have to be aware of that impact that we have on people, on the way, because we might insist that no, we're objective, we're neutral, we don't talk about politics, we don't. But since we work on
it's all political. I mean, the point is, it's all political.
We have to somehow.
It's the rationale behind it is all around, you know, evidence and usage and so on. But inevitably, we have to be very aware of some of the things that, you know, and the impact that they will have. And that a lot of that's, you know, some of the things that we do around labelling, making sure that things are labelled very clearly, so that if something's regarded as offensive, for example, that it's not, you know, it's not, we wouldn't not put it in the dictionary because that's another form of censorship and that's another set of political decisions, but we would make sure it's very carefully labelled so that if you come across this word, you know that other people might find this offensive because it's, you know, of racial or cultural sensitivities and so on.
And that's the reason why the OED has to be updated as well, because it started.
Why it has to be?
Why the OED has to be updated, because there are some things that come from the Victorian era, and there's some certain definitions and wordings that wouldn't be appropriate now for this day and age. So that's another thing that we have proposed.
Can I actually point to another place where you're having to make a very careful choice? And I wonder how you've navigated the question of script. You've already launched for Urdu, which is not Romanized. You are looking forward to the launch of Burmese and Vietnamese for Southeast Asia, which are also not Romanized. We have a couple of languages out there which are, I don't want to say script ambivalent, but which are existing between scripts. You know, Javanese is a big Southeast Asian example. We have a lot of Javanese texting that's Romanized, but you don't have a formal Romanization system for Javanese that's become academic or official. How will global languages navigate this sort of script minefield?
Yeah, so it's a little bit like the dialect question, but it's more kind of in your face. So where there's been there's a clear preference of script, obviously we would go for that. And if that's something that happened, you know, years ago that the script was changed, then that's quite a clear decision for us. If there's a kind of ambivalence, and there's we're probably most likely use both scripts. I mean, that would be an obvious sort of, you know, we're not. But on the other hand, you know, we'll be looking to the communities for particular advice about. And the only example we've had so far that's been a kind of mini example is that Setswana is spoken in southern Africa, and it's also spoken in Botswana, and they have the Botswana version, or I can't remember which way around it is, it has a lot of diacritics. So it is Romanized, but it's got loads of diacritics. And I think the Southern African one doesn't. So they've kind of taken, you know, they're sort of, the languages are almost identical. They don't call them different languages, but they talk about, you know, Botswana and Setswana. And so we had to take a decision there. We've actually launched with just one of the with the Botswanan version, but we've made it very clear this is